Thank you to Wanda for reading our scripture this morning, but I forgot to tell her that she was supposed to sing this passage. For what Wanda read is a song, the words of which are recorded here by Luke, but the tune we do not know. We know the author of the words, however. This is Zechariah's song. Some places call him Zachariah, some Zachary for short. Like all songwriters, Zechariah has a story, a life story out of which his song emerges. This is Zechariah's song, and Zechariah is a man for whom God has unexpectedly shown up. God does that, you know. Unexpectedly shows up in our lives. We didn't have time to clean the house. We didn't have time to put out the good china. We didn't have time to put on something decent looking or hide all the junk of our lives in the closet before God shows up. God shows up sometimes without any warning. Now, on the surface, we may wonder why Zechariah would have been surprised when God showed up in his life, for when it happened, Zechariah was at church. Of all places we would assume God would show up, we think it would be church. Except, you know, that's not always true. We church people are not always ready for God to show up at church. For one thing, God doesn't always stick to the bulletin, to our routine, to our plan. Do you remember the country song by Ray Stevens, "The Day the Squirrel Came to Church"? Remember that song? If you've never heard it, go home and Google it. Basic premise of that song is that a squirrel got loose in the church one day in the first self-righteous church of Pascagoula, Mississippi. And folks didn't know what they were experiencing, but in the process, things started to happen. And the chorus and the last verse of the song go, "The day the squirrel went berserk in the first self-righteous church in that sleepy little town of Pascagoula, it was a fight for survival that broke out in revival. They were jumping pews and shouting hallelujah." Well, 7 deacons, and then the pastor got saved. And $25,000 got raised, and 50 volunteered for missions in the Congo on the spot. And even without an invitation, there were at least 500 rededications, and we all got rebaptized whether we needed it or not. Zechariah and his kinfolk are at church this particular day, and not just any church, they are at the church, the temple in Jerusalem. It was their turn to lead the service. Evidently, in first century Judaism, different families took turns carrying out the priestly duties, including preaching, and also including taking the incense offering up to the altar. This is how things are said to have taken place. According to the Gospel of Luke, during the reign of King Herod, there was a certain priest named Zechariah, whose wife Elizabeth was also of the priestly family of Aaron. Luke states that both the parents were righteous before God, since they were blameless in observing the commandments and ordinances of the Lord. They were good church people. When the events related in Luke began, their marriage was still childless because Elizabeth was barren. It's always the woman's fault in the Bible, you know. And they were both well advanced in years. The duties at the temple in Jerusalem alternated between each of the family lines that had descended from those appointed by King David. Luke states that during the week when it was the duty of Zechariah's family line to serve at the temple of the Lord, the lot for performing the incense offering had fallen to Zechariah. The Gospel of Luke says that while Zechariah ministered at the altar of incense, an angel of the Lord appeared and announced to him that his wife would give birth to a son, whom he was to name John, and that this son would be the forerunner of the Lord. Not expected. God shows up, and it was not a part of the plan for the day. Not a part of Zechariah and Elizabeth's plan for their old age. Being childless was seen in their day as a curse of sorts, a sign of God withholding favor. Now, we all have known of folks who wanted children, but for whatever reason could not conceive a child. In our day, there are many more options to the resolution of that dilemma than afforded to those in days of old, but it still, even now, can be a painful and disappointing struggle. But on the flip side, there comes a point in life where children, as wonderful as they are not so much a part of the plan. Well, yes, he was a late in life baby. We already had the real estate brochures out looking at places on the Florida coast for our golden years, talking about how much we needed to be putting aside to make it happen, and then little William came along, and surprise, we wouldn't have traded him for anything. Maybe you've heard those kinds of conversations, huh? Or, I could not begin to tell you how many people I know very well and respect to the utmost. They're nearing those years when the plan in life is to slow down a little, do what you want to do rather than what you have to do. And then, for a whole lot of different reasons, there's a grandchild born that becomes their total responsibility. In some cases, now it's even falling on the great-grandparents. It's hard to push a baby stroller and handle a walking stick at the same time, but there are folks doing it. Zechariah is old, and he looks over at his wife, and he loves her, but he suddenly realizes, I'm married to an old woman. And so, when the angel Gabriel comes to church that day, can we really blame Zechariah for having doubts? As much as he wanted to believe God can do all things, he wondered, what kind of things is God doing, and am I up to it? Well, the story goes that when the angel Gabriel visited Zechariah that day at church to tell them that he and his wife Elizabeth in their senior years would finally become parents to a child who would hold a very special place in God's plan, Zechariah could not hide his doubts. And in turn, he lost his voice. Do you remember that part of the story? Unable to speak, completely mute. Zechariah and Elizabeth were to name the child John, and John, known to the ages as John the Baptist, would serve as the one who would prepare the way for the promised one, the Messiah, who would soon be born to Elizabeth's relative, a virgin named Mary. All unexpected. Yes, Zechariah was a man to whom God had shown up unexpected. And in the process, he lost his voice. That's an awful thing to happen to a preacher. I cannot imagine what I would do if I lost my voice for a long period of time. And I doubt, as much as I believe you love me, you do love me, right? Yes. I doubt as much as I believe you love me, that you would keep me around if I looked like I was not going to have a voice for an extended, undetermined amount of time. You'd have to call the district superintendent and say, well, we love him dearly, but you'd like to send us somebody else. He has no voice. What good is a preacher without a voice? Now, I hesitate to reveal to you some things about myself, but I want to make a confession to you. I'm sort of glad Darla's not here today. For the evening, I learned about Darla, our piano player's accident. A picture popped up on Facebook with Darla holding her bandaged hands like this and looking something like this. And in just a split second, not any longer, my thought was, what good is a pianist with hands that look like this? Now that thought lasted less than a split second, and then my overriding thought was, oh, how can we reassure and comfort our Darla? She means so much more to us than just her hands. But what good is a preacher without a voice? I indeed did lose my voice one Easter Sunday early in my ministry. It started with a sore throat on Good Friday. I had preached a funeral on that Saturday with a raspy voice. I had whispered my way through an Easter sunrise service, but by the time I got to Easter morning worship, there was nothing left but sign language. Well, I did not know it at the time, but the next day I was told by the doctor strep throat had set in. I'm sure the funeral attendees and my church people didn't appreciate my sharing that with them, but for a preacher, not preaching on Easter Sunday would be like Dabo Sweeney not coaching on the night of the ACC tournament. It turns out, though, God knows what God's doing. I had written the sermon that Easter as if it were a letter from Mary Magdalene to the church telling her witness of what had happened at the tomb. So I mouthed to Jean right before time for the service to start, you read it for me. The duties of the preacher's wife are endless. Zechariah met God unexpected and lost his voice. Sometimes things like that happen in our lives, and at the time we simply cannot understand why. Why God would take his voice from one who had been called to proclaim a message of hope. Was this God's punishment for Zechariah having doubts about an angel's message? Who among us would not have had a hard time adjusting to the news of a child being born beyond when all thought it possible for a child to be born? Do you ever wonder why do things happen as they do? Why cancer? Why now? Why did she decide she no longer wanted to remain married now? Why, when everything seemed to be going so good, do I lose my job now? Why, when I did everything I was supposed to do, did all things turn out as they have, falling apart now? Why? I wondered. I wonder if Zechariah losing his voice was in reality God's way of helping Zechariah find his voice, his true voice, his God-gifted voice. What do I mean by that? I keep hearing those strange words of Jesus to his disciples. All of his disciples. Whoever wants to save his life must lose his life for my sake. Strange words. Losing actually means saving. What in the world does he mean? You know, one of the primary topics of debate in this brand new adventure called South Main Chapel and Mercy Center is how do we best help folks who are living in this world with what appears to be not enough. Not enough food. Not enough shelter. Not enough medical care. Not enough transportation. Not enough. The assumption we often make is that if we who appear to have more than enough can simply give to those who appear to have not enough, well, then all will be solved. I came across this observation by Joe the plumber, of all people. Do you remember Joe the plumber? Joe the plumber showed up in the 2008 presidential election supposedly as this regular guy who was speaking for all the regular Americans. Well, there is probably not a political view in sight that Joe the plumber and I have in common. But I stumbled across these words from Joe the plumber on his blog. He says, now a lot of social workers and other well-meaning folks make the mistake of thinking they know what is best for homeless people, and they end up doing a lot of stuff that don't help heal anything. All that it does is keep the ego feeling good about itself. Amen. Say if you're feeding the hungry and doing it out of pity, or out of a sense that it's your duty as their superiors, well, they will understand that and they will treat you like everybody else they don't trust. They will lie to you and manipulate you and steal from you and work you for every last thing they can get from you. However, if you see and treat folks as an equal, they will understand this as well, and over time, will understand that you are somebody they can trust. And maybe they've never trusted a living soul. And slowly but surely, they'll get better. That is how Christ worked. Seeing others, no matter what station in life, as children of the Father, worthy of his love. What is interesting about this approach is that it means our giving up control. Can we do that? Oftentimes, we who have lived in the security of a well-mannered, well-resourced, well-managed life, we have a hard time giving up control. Maybe that's what God was trying to show Zechariah when God showed up unexpected and Zechariah lost his voice. Maybe he was saying, Zechariah, be quiet for a while so you can hear my voice. Zechariah, step out of your role long enough so you can realize that I love you because you are my child, not for what you do. Zechariah, trust in me even when you cannot see a way, and I will make a way. Zechariah. Amen. In the end, Zechariah and Elizabeth, in their wrinkled old age, did have a child. And what a child he was. Totally unpredictable, that John the Baptist. But it was he who prepared the way for the one who once and for all saved the world. All the world. Thank God. In the end, God gave Zechariah his true voice, and Zechariah sang this most beautiful song. he's still singing this song.